While Cooler wanted to further discuss the terms of their alliance with Bojack, his lieutenant, Salza, asked to see him outside. The two stepped out, where he's informed that their ship was ready to take off, and more importantly, some of the Kanasan shamans had concocted a special medicine that would help with his sickness. Cooler figured this medicine was responsible for him being alive, but made note of the illness still being present.
Well, yes, they said such an illness could not be cured, but held off.
Salza further apologized for this, but Cooler waved it off. For now, it bought the Iceling time, something he'd need to bring the fight to Frieza. He thanked Salza for the information and for handling things while he was gone, then stepped back into the holding area. Cooler informed both his crew and Bojack's that they'd be leaving the planet in a few hours, as they'd need to regroup with the others on Yardrat. This prompts Angila to question how the blue crew would get off planet Kanasa, something Cooler had no answer for. But that's when Salza steps in. He tells them about the old Frieza Force ships currently housed there to make it seem like the planet is still occupied. The rebels wouldn't miss the ships, and one can easily be explained away by a stray meteor, much like Planet Vegeta's destruction. Bojack accepts these terms, but does offer a word of advice. While he hasn't been told much, he does know Frieza plans on eventually getting rid of that planet, since it's known to be full of tricky, possibly powerful creatures, much like Kanasa was. Cooler takes this in, knowing he'll have to eventually either evacuate Yardrat or possibly defend it from Frieza himself. With that, he wishes the Heaters good luck in their endeavors, and tells them he'll have Naze keep a channel open for them. The cyborg then left his new allies to do whatever they wanted. He knew the Kanasans would feel uneasy, but he just had a feeling that Bojack could be trusted. Now, as for what his crew would do, well, he needed to speak with Pybara and see Broly's improvement. Until then, he'd have to do some meditation and try to formulate a plan for taking on the Empire. For the next week, that's all Cooler did, letting Salza handle the armored squadron and the trip towards Yardrat. The Kanasans had given him enough medicine to last for a while, though it was limited since it was resource intensive to make. He couldn't understand why people were so selfless, giving up so much of their time just to make sure he was healthy. But then again, he was doing the same for them in a way. Perhaps they simply wanted him on his feet in order to destroy Frieza, just as he wanted to destroy Frieza, not for their sake, but for his own. Certainly, he didn't want others to suffer anymore, but if all he did was destroy the Empire, and then shortly passed away from his illness, wouldn't that just make way for another powerful tyrant to rise up? The Iceling needed a way to make sure this whole rebellion wouldn't be a waste of time. He considered asking Bojack to take the reins, but that man was far too carefree and bloodthirsty to rule. While there's nothing wrong with such traits, they were fit for a soldier, whereas ruling took a far more cautious and calculated mind. Paragus had experience in the game of politics, being a middle-class Saiyan, but he also had a heart full of hatred and could easily turn into another King Vegeta. Cooler considered that he could potentially have a child of his own, grooming them to take over, but then the galaxy would see this as just one monarch usurping another. There was also that one guy in charge of the Galactic Patrol, but once again, another monarch. The person who should rule would ideally be unconnected to Cooler, at least by blood, and have a strong sense of morality, while also being able to handle the drastic political situations put upon their shoulders. This was a frustrating dilemma, one where the Iceling felt as if he were going in circles, and so he focused on a slightly less complicated problem. One thing Cooler did have figured out was where his crew would strike next. They'd disrupt the chain of production across the Empire, most importantly, the production of their soldiers. Planet Doe was the main hub that dealt with the bureaucratic and managerial aspects of the Empire. There, they processed paychecks, criminals, and new recruits. It was simultaneously the brain and heart of Frieza's operation, and had the largest training barracks in the galaxy. Nays reported that in total, they trained around 500,000 soldiers every year, most of which wouldn't survive long after seeing combat. Cooler planned on destroying the planet at first, but then he thought about the thousands of innocent people just doing their jobs. He knew many of the soldiers were forced into said occupation, while some genuinely thought they could make a difference. There were also the prisoners housed beneath the planet's surface, of which several were once rebels themselves. This mission would take some tact, but Cooler had a plan, one which would make his rebellion known to the entire galaxy. No, to the entire universe. Once arriving back at Yardrat, the cyborg could sense just how powerful Broly had become, easily having a power level that could contend with Frieza now. However, when Pybara summoned him, it wasn't exactly good news. Broly had become powerful, yes, but his mind had also grown considerably. He did enjoy sparring and fighting, like many Saiyans, but his heart was peaceful. The boy had zero interest in having a serious, life-threatening battle with Frieza or King Cold.
What? Are you saying Broly refuses to fight for the rebellion, even with millions of lives at stake?
Cooler tried to stay calm, but he clenched his fist, looking over to see the boy hiding behind a nearby pillar. Yes, I am. And that is his decision and his alone. Pybara looked over and waved Broly forward.
And what does your father think of this?
As Broly stepped forward, he looked down at the floor.
I think it's disappointing, but it is his decision, and he's far too strong for my previous tactics to work now.
Paragus stepped forward into the room, arms crossed with that signature giant frown on his face. He explained that he had done some thinking in their time here, and revealed that if Broly wouldn't be of any help, perhaps the remaining Saiyans could be. Cooler was a little shell-shocked, as Paragus had previously wanted to get revenge on Vegeta, the leader of the remaining Saiyans, and now he was actively speaking about recruiting them? Just what had the cyborg missed in his time away?
Trust me, I'd rather kill the little imp, but reports say he's strong and can handle himself in battle. He also has another mid-class and low-class warrior with him. Aside from that, there's his younger brother, though his whereabouts are unknown, since apparently he had a low battle power, and the king wanted to cover it up.
Cooler noticed Paragus clenching his own fists, clearly remembering what happened with him and Broly. But the cyborg is intrigued by the possibility of having even more recruits, especially powerful ones. Paragus, however, seemed more calm and collected than prior. There was still that intensity about him, but there was far less hate and resentment in his gaze. It would seem he really did do some thinking, just as Cooler had. Well, if Paragus thought he could handle it, then Cooler would trust and allow him to take a pod to meet the other Saiyans. As for Broly, well, Cooler was disappointed, angered even, but Pybara was right. It was his life. Let's just hope his decision wouldn't lead to the loss of others. Cooler then asked to be alone with Pybara before informing him of what's happened. From the last seed of the Cybermen to the recruitment of the Heaters, Cooler explained just how much had changed, including himself. Pybara listened, not saying a single word until the Iceling was done, not even batting an eye at the revelation of another key signature within Cooler's cybernetic body. Well, that was quite the journey, wasn't it? Now, what do you wish to do with this new information? Cooler began to explain his plans for Planet Doe, but Pybara said he knew that wasn't what he asked. The Yardratian was referring to the foreign key, wasn't he?
I haven't had the time to make sense of it. I'm not sure what ability this is, but I know it's part of the reason I'm alive and part of the reason I'm dying. I know I'll have to remove it one day, but for now, it will stay.
Very well. I can sense you want to do this yourself, but if you ever need my help removing that parasite, I will happily do so with a single touch. Cooler thanked the Grand Master before going to exit the palace. As he walked outside, Pybara wished him good luck and congratulated him on making so much progress. The Iceling continued making his way out towards the ship, which the children and Muesli were in front of, having grabbed some of their stuff from inside. Cooler didn't remember much of them, but he did notice both Angila and Qui had grown considerably. The latter pretty much a full-fledged adult now. Granola too had grown pretty tall, and even had the signature red eye of the Ceruleans. This reminded Cooler of his time on Planet Herb, and how that creature wanted nothing more than a bright future for its offspring. Cooler had never thought about having a kid, at least not for the reasons most people do. He figured all that child would experience was hardship, especially since the cyborg couldn't be in the picture for much longer. But he was happy Muesli and the other kids could grow up in a safe, or safer, environment, not having to stay cooped up on the ship at all times. Cooler disliked confined spaces, though had grown used to such conditions, so much so that being in open areas made him somewhat uncomfortable. Speaking of which, Cooler needed to find a place to plant the seed he'd been entrusted with. While Yardrat did have some plant life, the planet was nothing like Herb. The cyborg needed to find a place with plenty of water and greenery, somewhere a plant could grow strong. He had Naze search for such a planet that was within the galaxy, while he informed the crew of their plans. There were several planets fit for such a plant, but the one that resembled Herb the most was some small backwater world named Arth. Well, Cooler would keep that in mind, but for now, he'd make sure everyone was ready for a battle. The Armored Squadron and Paragus were informed of the planned attack on Planet Doe, where Paragus would make his way from there towards the remaining Saiyans. Now, while Muesli could certainly fight, she had no inclination for it. However, Granola and Qui figured they were old enough to embark on such a dangerous mission, even expecting to be invited on it. However, when asking to join in, Cooler said no. Well, this just isn't fair. The boys have been training hard, even meditating like Broly did. They were ready, and they'd do anything to prove it.
Anything, huh? Even fight me?
Cooler stood up, glaring towards the two kids. Qui didn't say anything, but Granola argued that they'd show him just how powerful they were.
So be it. Follow me then, children.
The cyborg began to fly off, with Muesli trying to rein the two in, but it was too late. They made their bed, now they'd have to sleep in it. In a nearby wasteland, Cooler allowed the two boys to strike first, telling them to go all out. Of course, there was no contest, and Cooler simply toyed around with the two, demonstrating just how powerful he was to them. Once they were thoroughly defeated, he knocked them out with a single chop to the back of the neck. They were certainly powerful for their age, but if another enemy like Bojack appeared, or even the Ginyus, these kids would have no answer for such an opponent. Perhaps, if they continue improving at such a rapid rate, they'd be allowed to participate in the final battle. But for now, kids should stay kids. Wow, you've really changed. Before, you wouldn't have hesitated to break a couple bones. Cooler looked over to see that snarky pink Yardrat from before.
Tori, was it? What are you doing out here?
Well, after seeing those kids challenging you, I just had to see the outcome. Besides, I hear you're off on another mission, and unlike Grand Elder Pybara, I'm not content just standing by. Let me join you. Cooler wasn't exactly fond of this Yardrat, but he did need as many men as he could muster. Besides, this guy was powerful. He could probably defeat Flake and even Naze. He'd be an invaluable enemy if any strong opponent showed up. In that case, he couldn't say no. Good. now I can get some proper combat experience. Fighting Yaki and Soba was getting pretty boring. So, when do we leave?
We leave tomorrow morning. Make sure you're prepared for a long trip. We'll likely be gone for 6 or 7 months, due to the planet being near the core of the Empire.
Tori shook his head before stating that he didn't have any otherworldly possessions, and promising to pack lightly. With that, everyone got ready for the next day. They said their goodbyes, Pybara even stepping out of his palace to say farewell to Broly. Now, Muesli was acting a little strange the whole morning, and once everyone was speaking, she took Cooler to the side. There, she asked if he remembered Monaito, the Namekian back on Planet Cereal. The name rang some bells, but the Iceling wasn't sure. Well, Muesli remembered him talking about these legendary wish-granting orbs, though she thought they were just legends. However, after spending time with the Yardratians and on Cooler's ship, she's learned that apparently legends of such orbs existed outside of Planet Cereal. She didn't want to lead Cooler down any rabbit holes, but she asked him to go back to Cereal and check it out. Maybe these orbs could restore Cooler to the way he used to be, something that could help the rebellion. The Iceling promised he'd check this out, though remained skeptical. He wanted to believe such orbs existed, but at the same time, if they did, would he really be able to restore his body? Should he even restore it? He didn't want to get his hopes up, and so chose to focus on the current mission. He got in the ship and ordered their takeoff. There, he, the Armored Squadron, Paragus, Broly, and Tori all watched the stars fly past them. They were prepared for anything, fully accepting this mission could be their end, or a new beginning. No matter which one came, though, they'd all give it their best. But that's where we're going to be leaving things off for right now. If you enjoyed this part, maybe you enjoy a story all about General Blue surviving his encounter with Tao. But even if you don't, thank you for getting to this part of the video. You guys have a good day or night wherever you are. That's it for now. Bye-bye.